I don't know. The webinar is being recorded. Okay. I have to continue to consent. All right.
You get the chicken you need.
Cool.
Okay, so I think you're live. We've got people coming on.
Oh yeah, I see. Oh my.
Hi,
Oh,
everybody.
that's people from out of the area too.
Hi, friends. We're just letting you all sign on, and then we'll get started.
We're looking at distracting little lists.
Awesome. It's going to be, what, 107 today?
Is it? I thought it was
I
still
don't know.
104. I didn't look lately. It was
Yeah,
just
102.
hot in the morning for walking. I mean, I walk in the morning, and you know, you have to try and get out earlier, but I don't seem to succeed. No,
You have to get
only 103 today,
Okay.
according to Weather Underground. Tomorrow,
You have to
106.
You got to get out before 7.
Doesn't help. You almost have to get out before 6.
Right.
7 o'clock, it was 80-some degrees already.
It was very hot.
It was very warm. Yeah.
So
Right. So we'll
Yeah,
maybe we'll do official start at about 10:05 or so.
yeah,
Sure.
that sounds good.
Trickle in.
Makes perfect sense. My hair okay?
Your hair's great.
I cut it myself.
That's awesome. I'm about due for one.
No, it looks great. I admit, I had hair down to here in high school.
You did?
Yeah, I did.
Nice. Ponytail?
No, it was too curly. It would sort of form a puff if I got it to pull back, but it was just very, very ragged. I did run across a photograph of myself in my, in that era with flag pants and a purple t-shirt thing. It's very strange.
What color was your hair back then?
It's almost red. It's sort of a deep red chestnut.
Nice.
They called me, my beard was more red than my head was, but my head was more brown.
Nice.
But there's interesting pictures from years past. So
So you all are getting the pre-interview backstory to Dan Levenson.
story, yeah. There's actually someone here who knows a lot of that. So
Nice. Great.
I'm seeing on the list, admit I'm scanning the list.
Great. Great. Well, we've got, it's so nice to be with you all this morning. We can't see you, but we know you're there. And my name is Kimi Eisele, and I am the managing editor of Borderlore, which is the online publication of the Southwest Folklife Alliance. And we cover culture and heritage in the region. And we've been publishing weekly for the last month and a half or so. And then we thought it would be fun to do some live interviews to just honor the fact that most of us are still working from home, not all of us, of course. And we wanted to showcase some of our incredible artists who we have awarded with our annual Master-Apprentice Artist Award. That goes to a nominated and juried and accepted traditional artist or culture bearer in the state of Arizona. So we have another round of those awards coming up due July 1st. So if you have any artists that you'd like to nominate for that, we encourage you to do that. You can find all that information at southwestfolklife.org. You can find all past stories of Borderlore at borderlore.org. And we also, I just want to make a couple quick announcements before we get into the interview. I want to thank Kate Jewett-Williams, who you can all see here. She's our tech person today, supporting on the back end. She will disappear in a moment, but I wanted to give her a shout out and thanks for all her help in getting this new live series off the ground. So thank you, Kate. And we'll see you maybe back at the end of the interview if you pop back on. Cool, thank you so much. We have several interviews coming up after today. We'll be doing 3 other Wednesdays in June, and they are all at different times because our artists and culture bearers have different lives and different things that they're doing. So we've got Tanisha Tucker with Desert Foods next Wednesday at 8 in the morning. So get up early for that. And then we have Keith Johnson, who is a percussionist and storyteller from the African diaspora. And that's on June 17th at 7 p.m. And then Jose Soto, who is a baile folklorico dancer and the director of Tradiciones, a Phoenix-based folkloric dance company, and he will be with us on June 24th at noon. You can find out about all of those interviews at southwestfolklife.org, and you can register the same way you did for this or tune in on Facebook Live. One more quick announcement, and that is that our fearless director, Dr. Maribel Alvarez, has been hosting some live chats on the Tucson Meet Yourself Facebook page. Some of you will have heard Dan at Tucson Meet Yourself, and she's doing just a fun hour of folk wit in uncertain times. So she's talking about, I think, food next Tuesday at 4 o'clock, so you can tune into those. So even in this time of not being able to be together, we're still trying to bring you folk life and celebrate the beautiful traditions in our region. So here we are this morning with Dan Levenson. He's a 2017 recipient of our Master-Apprentice Annual Artist Award for his work in keeping alive the traditions of old-time Appalachian music. Good morning, Dan. We're so happy to be with you.
Good morning, Kim. Great to be here. This is such a wonderful idea, so thank you for allowing me to be a part of it.
Great. So why don't you just start by introducing your life as a musician and tell us what brought you to music and how you got started and what led you specifically to the forms that you play.
You know, what we now call old time music is to me, a sort of a confined version or a subset of what's sometimes referred to as traditional music, folk music. And I consider myself very lucky that my family was a participant in folk and traditional music before I was born. And in fact, the story from years ago is that my parents met at a square dance and my dad was calling the dance, or might have been calling the dance. So from very, very early remembrances, I have to admit, I just saw it as music, whether it was sing around in our living room or my mom playing piano or guitar or my dad calling a dance or listening to recordings. It was just always there. And born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, sort of the northern edge of the southern Appalachians, we had music in the schools, in the public schools. So music has always been a part of my life. Refining to the point that in my 30s, I guess, I ended up working at a shop in Cleveland, Ohio, managing a music store that specialized in traditional music and instruments, banjos, fiddles. They built banjos, they built auto harps, had built hammer dulcimers. So it kind of took me deeper into a style of music I was already learning to appreciate. And even before I left Pittsburgh, I was part of the Coal Country Cloggers dance group. I was learning more about the Appalachian styles, the Southern Appalachian styles of music and those instruments. So it's in some ways always been there. In other ways, one day I found myself playing more than working.
Lovely. Yeah, it's so interesting that it's, you know, when music seeps into the home and the schools, those avenues tend to open for people.
Yeah, and I think the experience is, you know, has just been wonderful. Just wonderful.
Fantastic. So tell us, I know a lot of people here today either play old time music or know your work. but some may not. So can you just give us kind of a brief primer on what old time music is and when
Sure.
does it start and when does it end?
Sure. It's an odd term because so many people use it to mean so many different things. And I've come over the years to refine it, interpret it as old time music generically is usually what you refer to that your old folks played, your family, your historians, the people in your area. So old time music might be a totally different style in, say, northern Michigan or Florida than it is in Virginia or West Virginia. For me, when I say old time, the community that I play with and participate in now, it's usually referring to Southern Appalachian style string band music, primarily from the late 1800s through the early 1900s. We now look at the radio and recording industry was heavily started by, loosely termed again, country music or old time music people such as the Carter family and Jimmy Rogers and the Skillet Lickers and all these groups from all over the Southeast. So there's a broad interpretation and we've kind of narrowed it. So for me, it's probably that old time string band music, old tunes as opposed to modern written tunes, though they're part of the tradition, as it were. Banjo, fiddle, guitar, bass, sometimes mandolin, sometimes harmonica. In today's old time tradition, less likely a keyboard, but in another old time tradition, it was very much a part of it. So between old recordings, stories that you can read, books, research that other folks have done, it's just this fascinating topic. But today, if you say, where's the old time jam in Tucson? When we were allowed to meet regularly, we'd meet every second and fourth Mondays at the Lucky Strike bowling alley. And everybody who came there knew we're there to sit together with these instruments and just play tune after tune after tune. And that's what it meant for us.
Lovely. And so you play fiddle and banjo primarily, correct?
Fiddle and banjo and clawhammer or old time banjo as opposed to the bluegrass. Most people, and myself included, at one point, you hear a banjo, you think bluegrass. And we do have an extremely viable bluegrass community here in Tucson, as well as an old time community. And one of the distinguishing factors tends to be the bluegrass banjo tends to have a resonator, a sort of a pie plate on the back. They tend to be louder, brighter sounding and played in a finger picked style with metal picks, whereas the old time style is more of a stroke style, relating more to the working man's hand or working woman's hand, I would say, and is less out front.
And the banjo, as many people know, but not everyone, the banjo has its birthplace.
Careful.
Okay.
It's thought to be Africa.
Yeah.
But yet, if you look in China, there are banjo instruments that date back 3,000 and 4,000 years.
Wow.
So I call it a melting pot instrument because there are almost every culture, if you look up, almost every culture in the world has a banjo type of instrument. And those cultures all come here and kind of redo this thing. And we have an instrument that is at once unique because of the style or the physical characteristics of the modern banjo, but yet has ties and roots to almost every culture in the world.
Wow.
But yes, I know that the African root is usually the most common traced one.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about, just the diaspora of the African American influence?
Yeah. I'm not sure I can speak specifically to one versus the other. When I started to look at it, what you find is the struck lutes originate in roughly Assyria, which is an area that doesn't exist in name anymore. And trade routes from that time period drop down through the Middle East and through Africa. They also go up through Asia and across Europe. And then you get these kind of two trails from Europe and from Africa that re-meet in the United States, some coming through places like Jamaica, the Caribbean, or Caribbean. And this joining of all these types of not only the instrument, but the music along the way. So what we have today as old time is Celtic roots, African roots, European roots, Chinese roots. It's amazing what you can, the music and when that starts to come across or connect to itself.
And do you feel that when you're playing this music, do you have a sense of that worldliness? Even if we think of this as having some sort of root, like in the hollers of Appalachia, do you also think about that tradition when you're playing?
I don't know that I consciously do. Maybe a way to put it would be, I have all of that in all the references and research and material that I've listened to or read about over the years, but I also have my growing up, figuratively speaking, through, rock and roll, heavy metal, my dad listening to bagpipes, my mom playing piano, jazz, him taking me to the jazz concerts. So what I'm consciously or always aware of is that it all joins to form what I come out with today when I play. Interesting, always discovery. I'm reading a book right now on antebellum fiddling that makes comment to no real reference or mention of fiddle music in the South pre-Civil War, which to me is just an astounding thing. All of the collection, all of the written material, all of the source material is, lack of a better term, Northern and European. It's not till after that it translates. And indeed, you have an instrument that slaves came over with the idea of how to create and play, being adopted by a predominantly white Southern community, to the point that there's very few Black players today embracing the instruments or the music. There are some. Joe Thompson was one. The Chocolate Drops is a band. I'm trying to think of one of my buds in Virginia, Earl White, who's an incredible fiddler and banjo player. I mean, he's one of the few Black players of the continuers of the culture. At the same time, I had about a year and a half where I worked playing with a woman who had learned her dulcimer music in China, learned the Chinese hammer dulcimer, brought this Chinese music here to audiences, and I was just taken with it, with the music. It was just, the connections were so fascinating. There's a piece, there are many pieces that we took from the Chinese tradition. I throw them on the Appalachian style old time banjo, and they just play right out. They're perfect.
Wow. That kind of speaks to this notion of that, I've titled this series, The Ways of Resilience. And yes, what you're saying is just this incredible adaptability of lineages to connect and intertwine. And talk a little bit about the resiliency, both in the music that you play and in your life.
Yeah, and I looked it up, and I'm looking sideways to look at another screen. The ability to mentally or emotionally cope with crisis and return to pre-crisis state quickly is one of the definitions of resilience. And when I compare that or look at my life, maybe everybody has the feeling somewhere along that, things are going along and all of a sudden they hit something and they have to adapt and change and be resilient to move on to the next stages. And whether it's the school you're in, the people you're in, changing schools for me was very dramatically difficult at one point. deciding a major, going away to school, coming home to school, and having this music undertone through my life really heavily. And then one day finding that that is my life, you know? So I think we all have it in us to be incredibly resilient. And what differentiates us is more what we've had to deal with as opposed to being able to. Most of us are able to. So being a musician is dealing with so many things, reinventing yourself, finding yourself in new places, new positions, new music coming in, trying to grow, yet in my case, maintain that tie to where this music came from, in my mind.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So I've got still a few more questions, but there's also one coming in from the from our viewers, and so I'm going to read that. And since we were talking a little bit about the specifics of the form,
Sure.
So Russ Healy asks, when I tell people I play old time, they often ask me if it's like bluegrass. Well, I have my ideas of the differences and similarities. I'd love to hear you elaborate on this subject, Dan.
Sure. There's a couple ways to approach that. It's a very common, that's a very common thing to be asked. Oh, or said, people coming, excuse me, coming up and saying, "Oh, this is great bluegrass music," while we're playing at the farmers market. For instance, we play a lot. You know, my current band was playing at Rito Farmers Market every month until this ended us, but ended our playing. But the primary difference, interestingly, is that bluegrass music is a created style whose intent was to take old time music and give it a commercial polish. So Earl Scruggs, famous bluegrass banjo player, was quoted at one point of saying, "I'm going to take the banjo and give it back to the people, take it back to the stage," in other words. So the biggest difference instrumentally is the bluegrass banjo, as I already said. It's louder, brighter, it has a different configuration and setup. And bluegrass is also primarily based around mandolin as opposed to fiddle, which was Bill Monroe's instrument, the father of bluegrass. You asked for when does something start and begin. Bluegrass starts in I believe, around the 40s with Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys calling it bluegrass. And it's very orchestrated and very performance oriented. So you might notice if you go to a bluegrass festival, there's a stage, there's microphones, old bands may be dressed in suits and ties, string or otherwise, and the audience is in lawn chairs. They're sitting and enjoying the music. Old time festival, people, if they're watching the stage at all, the people on the stage are sort of just a little more scattered, having a little more fun, I like to think sometimes. And the audience is much more laid back and relaxed. There may be a blanket here, a couple of chairs there, and a clogging board up in front of the stage and people dancing and participating. But the old time festival, there's more music happening in the campground. So I hope that helps.
Thanks for that question. Just one other question coming in from Paul Mulgrad. Hi, Dan. From
Hi, Paul.
From whom or how did you learn fiddle and banjo?
Cool question. Like I said, I had music. I'll try and make a short version of the answer. There was music in the house. There was a piano in my house that I remember starting piano lessons, group lessons in public school in 2nd grade. And the piano I was playing on, when my parents went to get it tuned, found out that it was really untunable. It was too expensive to replace it. So I was into 3rd grade already, and my parents, my mom primarily, took me down to decide what instrument to play. I ended up being put on violin at the time, not fiddle, and having a classical symphony instructor at the end of 3rd grade and playing in the grade school symphony orchestra and all the way through high school. So most of that time I played violin, and that was pretty formal, hold it this way, do this way, play this way. But it taught me the rudiments of that, and school just taught me the rudiments of basic music and how to play the instrument. I also took up guitar on my own about a year later, taught myself guitar. So by the time I was done with high school, who wanted to play violin, you know? Guitar was much more entertaining and much more fun in a social setting. So dropped the violin totally. Ended up, blah, 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 years later, learning banjo. Actually, one of my friends in grade school who's here, Penny, gave me this old banjo that I tried to learn bluegrass and it just didn't work. And I gave that back to her, and somebody else gave me one that ended up in bad shape. And I bought one. I just wasn't getting it. So I was playing guitar, dancing, and I ended up at Gooseacres Folk Music as the manager. And that's kind of where I learned to play banjo. But in most ways, I was self-taught. I watched what I saw, I listened to what I saw. The only lesson I had is that the owner at the time came out and showed me this tablature sheet, and he put it down and he said, don't play it too fast, and that was it. That was my only lesson. So I learned from listening and seeing other people play. Picked up fiddle a couple years into my banjo time, and basically the best way to learn fiddle from violin was to forget everything I knew from violin lessons except intonation and control of the bow. Take the violin and slouch. Take the banjo and pretend you know. So I kind of, a lot of listening though. So as much, Paul, as it's the instrument, it's the style of music. And I want to think that I probably spent somewhere around 5 years after someone said, that's not bluegrass, that's old time, feeding me jam session and tapes, concert tapes, buying virtually every album I could get my hands on, and listening to this style in depth to the exclusion of any other music. So about a 5-year indoctrination in the sound of it. And learning to play the instruments, I'm still learning. It's lifelong.
Thanks, Dan. And thanks for that question. Somebody's asking, what's the name of your band?
The current band is Dan Levenson and the Cat Mountain Rounders, and that's myself, Emmy Truckenmiller, John Walkenbach, and Jerry Weiner. And we're all here in It's this first time, I think it's the first time I've had a whole band that's all in the same city.
Beautiful.
So,
do you want to play a song or two, and then we can come back to some questions?
Sure, we can play. You know, one of the things I started thinking is of the banjo tune, the Chinese, you know, the Chinese tune on the Chinese tune on the banjo, Thunder on a Dry Day. I could probably play through that if I can. I think I can remember that one. And this is, by the way, this is a new ode banjo that was just sent to me to try out. Pretty simple, but it's very typical of an old-time banjo. Open back, no resonator, just head on wood and a very simple neck and minimal ornamentation. So this is a Thunder on a Dry Day. It's a Chinese tune. That's one of the reasons I picked it. It was a Chinese traditional tune illustrating in music the reactions of a community as a 3-year drought is broken and they can hear the rain coming.
it just lifts that sound just sort of like lifts the mood and spirit automatically. Is there such a thing as a mournful banjo song?
Well, wasn't it Steve Martin who says you can't play a sad song on the banjo?
That's what I was just wondering. It seems like it would be impossible.
No, it's kind of impossible. There are some slower, mournful things and some odd tuning things, but I don't know. It's like, I think maybe it reminds us of so many things we did as children when we're happy and we don't know any different. So a lot of the nursery rhyme tunes we know were old time fiddle tunes. So Polly Put the Kettle On. Remember Polly Put the Kettle On?
Can you remind me?
Huh?
Remind
Polly
me.
put the kettle on. Polly put the kettle on. We'll all have tea. So a lot of those, you know.
You say, I was reading on your website, and you one of the things you talk about in your stage show, An Evening with Dan Levenson, is then that folk music is the music of community, which sounds like an obvious thing to say, folk music, community, but what does that mean? Say more.
It's the music that was, so in some ways this plays into the question about the difference in bluegrass. Traditional old-time music, folk music, was the music that people played themselves. They didn't have to go out. They didn't have to go for a concert. Somebody in town. There's a book called Farmhouse Fiddlers that has a little section in it. It says if you had a fiddler in your community, you were very lucky. So it didn't matter if that fiddler sounded like they were trying to cut cabbage with a comb. They were your fiddler. So we all participate in old time, in folk music, in traditional musics. And that's the biggest difference. It's not meant for the stage. That doesn't mean it wasn't on the stage. There were a lot of great old time acts that performed, and the reason we have so many of the recordings is because of the performing bands that were recorded in the late teens and early 20s. But there were a lot of home recordings, people that never did get out. And people played together at home on the porch. It was parlor music as opposed to stage music.
Right. And part of just lifting a spirit in the moment, probably.
Yes. Yeah. And, you know, community was different even 100 years ago. It's not to draw the line between urban and rural music, because the people from the rural areas moved to town. They took their music with them. Bob Carlin traces a lot of the music transmission through the railroad lines. As the railroads expand, the people that build it take the music with them. I have also traced some of it, for instance, from my hometown. If you follow the Ohio River, downriver, all the way to Missouri, all along that area, the music can be very similar. So communities spread it by traveling, playing together. And, you know, I see this question about the jam session and social distance sounding like a dichotomy from Bob Denton. It's the modern jam session that we have can have 20 or 30 people playing together in one section. I'm finding that I think that's the anomaly. There weren't many people that played in an area. So social distancing, sitting 6 feet apart to play, for instance, really not bad, especially if you only have 2 or 5 people, 2 to 3, 5 people. Banjo and fiddle just by themselves are a very important and prominent subset of old time music in the, say, the Galax region, Galax, Mount Airy, North Carolina, Galax, Virginia, where some of our our heroes come from. One or two people, you didn't have 30 people playing together. So it's something that I keep looking into, but I think that in some ways we're back to more of what it was because we can't get together quite so easily at a central location in one group. And the dances were fewer and farther between. The fiddler played the dance. And some of the older folks that I met that I was lucky to go and meet and play with, they played these things themselves. So, and then you had families where the jam session, for instance, in Texas would be Eck Robertson. You know, if you went to Eck Robertson's house or Benny Thomason's house, they held court. It was kind of, they led the show. So there's a lot of differences. I don't think it feels like a dichotomy today because we've been so used to just getting together, and we can't do that now. But I think it's going to remind us how good music can be in small groups, just a couple of people, you know.
So we have another question. Sylvia Walters is segueing us nicely into the fiddle, and she asked, "What's the difference between the violin and the fiddle?"
And I'm gonna give you a little bit of background. Sylvia Walters is my aunt, and she has been here to our jam sessions, but she lives in Israel. So, and she's very active with presenting music over there, traditional music with the Carmiel Folk Club and places like that where I've gone and played. So there's several answers. The instrument, the truth is the instrument is physically the same instrument, though the setup, the angle of the neck, the height of the bridge, the type of strings you use is different. It's not quite as, violin is set up for classical playing very differently. The jokes that abounded are you carry a violin in a case, you carry a fiddle in a poke. You know, $5,000. If you buy this instrument as a violin, it's going to cost you a good $5,000 more than if you bought it as a fiddle, which actually is fairly true. So I had that happen to me with a bow once. A bow that I had, I went and found a very similar one at the Eastman School of Music up in Rochester, New York. And the bow that I think I had paid $250 up there, he said, well, he had one just almost identical. It felt the same, looked the same. He said, well, this one's kind of junk, but it's playable. It would only be $750.
Wow. Wow.
So the differences are mostly the player and the style.
You want to play us a little fiddle?
Sure, let's, you know, I've got two here, tuned different. I'm gonna pull this one because it's tuned to a low D, D-dad tuning. This one was made by Elin Howe up in Newaygo, Michigan. I've gotten to meet him as a builder. The other one I have here and several others that I own were built by Clifford Hardesty, who was an old-time fiddler in outside of Coshocton, Ohio, West Lafayette. But this one I keep tuned this way. I found that these instruments have personalities. The only thing I can figure is our instruments were made by what was once living, breathing material, the tree, the wood. And I think somehow that gets into them. So this instrument ended up in this tuning because every other tuning I tried, it was okay. And I really liked the instrument, but in this D-dad tuning, it just came alive. And the reason I picked this tuning or this one is there's a lot of people are familiar with a 1943 musical where you hear all recognize that theme, I think, called Rodeo by Aaron Copland. It was recorded in 1936 by the Library of Congress, probably, what's that, 6-7 years before. Rodeo is copywritten by a man named William H. Stepp. heart's retreat.
Wow, beautiful. That also feels very, it also feels uplifting of the spirit, but I do know that the fiddle can play mournful sound.
There's one, the very same tuning. So you get that real mournful, deep, rich sound out of it.
Yeah, interesting. Same tuning, same player, same fiddle.
Totally different. By the way, that's the difference between a violin and a fiddle. The violinists are sitting here looking at that music stand and facing the concert, and the fiddlers are all there sort of like watching the dancers.
Oh, nice. So I just want to invite any viewers to ask any questions before we head toward an ending at some point. But I have one question about, you were mentioning the methods of transmission by river and railroad. And so I think of you here now in Tucson and in the Southwest, a very different region, geographically, climate, people, and just curious about what kind of adaptations or cross-pollination happened between old-time Appalachian music and music of this region.
I think sometimes the regions are the idea of regionalisms are a little overrated. I find them more specific to the fiddler or to the musician. So a lot of the people who are watching, who are listening today, know who Melvin Wine is. For those who don't, he was a very well-respected and very, very accessible, very great old-time fiddler from West Virginia. And I had the occasion to meet Melvin. I didn't work with him at any length, but I knew who he was. And in my hometown of Pittsburgh, I was at the Smoky City Folk Festival one of the years that it was in Oakland. And I'm walking towards one of the area stages, and I'm listening to this fiddler playing, and I'm saying, whoa, they got Melvin Wine. And I turn around and I get around the corner, and it's not Melvin Wine, it's somebody totally different. But I asked him, he's about the same age. And he says, oh yeah, Melvin and I grew up about one holler away from each other, but we both learned from his daddy. So here was a style that came from one person directly to two others. We have some people now where you can tell who they learned from because they're almost identical to the style. So that transmission of style is, I think, more personal than regional. And the reality is as people moved from areas, we're definitely much more mobile today than, say, we might have been 100 years ago. But 100 years ago, you still either got on the train, the hobos got on the train and went somewhere else to work. People moved for work. WPA takes people from, Southern Appalachia, poor areas where there's no money, and they take them and they stick them to build a hotel and resort in Yosemite. They take their music with them. Snowbirds, which we know around here really well, people have been coming out west for a long time. Mel Durham from Arkansas ends up in Los Angeles. Tommy Jackson from I think Missouri ends up in Seattle. And so the music moves with the people. And I think that's the important part of that transmission, but it's style more than the actual tune. I think the written music gets into many more hands. And written music has been a method of transmission 1700s or earlier. The book that I talked about, the antebellum fiddling book, he has copies of what he calls common books. You know how we all collect tunes and put them in a notebook? 1805 and 1807 common books, which were students who had no money copying the transcriptions from, say, somebody else who had published a book, and as publishing becomes. So the idea that also contributes it. So it's not linear, it's not monolinear. There's several different ways. So as people move, this is that community again. They take their community, they take their music with them. How does Chinese music and Chinese instrument get here? How do African instruments and music get here? The people come and either bring their concept, if they were not allowed to bring their possessions, which was the case for most Africans coming here, or their instruments physically and their music, as the Chinese say, come over to build the railroads. Does that answer what you were asking?
Yeah, I was thinking also more of what, once you're here, I mean, the next question from our viewers gets to this a little bit, but does any of the flip out or the method what you would?
So with the instrument itself, you went a little garbled for a minute. With the instrument itself, I don't find much. I don't know if it's lucky or stupid. I don't tend to put fires in my instruments. I still tend to use wooden bows and instruments. Carbon fiber has become popular. I do carry some, carbon fiber bow, a synthetic bow at times, but it usually has real hair. So the instrument sounds different, but the physical instrument I haven't had. As a matter of fact, I have some instruments that I play here that I hated when I was east. And then when I was east, I hated them again. So evidently the whole atmosphere. A lot of people will indeed run humidifiers in their homes. And at the same time, for instance, violins are put together, fiddles are put together with what they call hide glue. And the intent has always been, as the humidity or your conditions change, if something dramatic happened, it would come apart by intent as opposed to splitting the woods. A lot of cracking in their instruments depends on how dry the wood was to begin with. So maybe I've just been lucky, like I said, but I have not found the climate here to negatively affect severely. So, and musically, I mean, you associate with the people who are in your area. We tend to be looks for like in most cases. So I look for other like-minded playing musicians that are compatible, for lack of a better word. I mean,
well, that segues nice. Matt Rolland is says, thanks for all you've done to spark our Arizona fiddle scene since you've moved here. Can't wait to play again soon. People move to Arizona regularly, and that's a part of our musical history. How do they get to the old-time community?
The old time, and this isn't, he's asking that, and by the way, we're very lucky to have Matt here as well, that he's moved down here after he was in Phoenix, and I think he was raised in Phoenix, but having been all over as also a semi-professional musician, though I don't think he's ever made it as full-time. He's had more sense than most of us. An incredible musician. We're very lucky to have him here. But the old community is, the way we're talking about it, tends to be really insular. And the way I described it to one person years ago, a New Mexico banjo player who had no idea there was any community in their area, I said, the old time community finds you. So you can go online, Corinne, this woman here, Corinne keeps, for instance, keeps a national or international jam map. So you can look up where a jam session is. The easiest way is, two easiest ways to find community are the local old time jam session, if someone will tell you where it is, which we happen to have, like I said, very public one. There's a lot of private ones also, smaller ones, but that's your entryway. Or in this day and age, the local contra dance, community square dance, as opposed to because those are the musicians you want, and they know where the community is. And there's this informal vetting that goes on where somebody heard you play, or they know who you play like, and you kind of sit in the peripherally. And as you become or prove you're the musician they want to have come back, in other words, you're not going to say, let's change keys now because we didn't stay in one key, or let's sing these old folk songs, because we don't. Move into the circle, or sooner or later somebody invites you to their private party jam or whatever. So it's a very community experience. When you move to a new community, check you out. Some communities, you're never really a member of that community. In my hometown, it's one of those where you can be there for 50 years, but you're going to be that lady from Arizona.
Right.
It's just how you are. So when you come in, they get to you, they invite you to the local events, and then you become friendly on a personal basis. You get invited to personal events. And it takes a little time. Pardon?
Relationships. Yeah.
Yes. Or you're known. You know, when Jared or Greg Knote came to visit his new granddaughter, everybody knows who Greg Knote is in my world. And he came to the jam, and it's like, yay! So, you know, we have our stars too.
So there's just a few more questions here that I want to ask, and then I just want to have you, you know, we've got about 5 more minutes, so I wanted to have you music. But Mark Ross asks, why is it not uncommon for old-time musicians playing 2 instruments, banjo and fiddle? Is it due to the nature of the music or similarities of style?
I don't know that I can give a definitive answer to that.
Yeah.
Most of us, play more than one instrument. There's few that only one. It may be, and I say this with some reservation, but maybe not a lot. If an area with a ton of fiddlers and you want a banjo, somebody says, well, I'll learn to play the banjo. Or you want a guitar player, somebody just decides they're going to do that. You want to fill a hole. Bands as famous as the Grateful Dead took a guy who'd never played bass in his life. You're going to be our bass player because we need a bass player.
Yeah. Maybe you
did it.
Have a proclivity for music. You have it.
Yeah, and it may be, if it has string. That in my case, I started on violin. Like I said, my real first instrument's violin. It's got strings, and every kid in my age group wanted to learn to play guitar, folk guitar, acoustic guitar. You know, whether it's the Weavers, which my parents listened to, and or James Taylor and Joni Mitchell. They're acoustic guitar players. We want to play that because popular, that attracts a crowd. And it's cooler to play a guitar, violin, especially in the young community. As I moved through that, and I had always had interest in the banjo. It's not really found out which style of banjo I liked. I just was gravitated to it and loved it. And in an area where I also wanted to go back, and somebody really wanted to play fiddle. So I tried it, and I finally became, so I ended up becoming a fiddler because there's enough banjo players.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I don't, in my early band, I'm the banjo player in a town where there's a lot of great fiddle. Later on, I'm traveling more, so I'm moving in more audition, partly because another band needs a fiddler and they want me to play. To going on the road, partly with a band as a duo, and finding myself traveling to do the gigs on my own as a solo. So now I have to And this once you go to fiddle, you don't tend to want to go somewhere else. But I love them all. I mean, my primary instruments, banjo, fiddle, guitar. I play at a little bit of mandolin. I can suck at bass enough to get through a tune or two. But other than that, you know,
Yeah.
the other instruments don't kind of interest me.
I wish you had 6 hands right now so you could play all 3. But why don't you choose one of them and you know, finish us out here with the morning with the song.
Okay, are there any requests from anybody for a particular tune or particular instrument? I'm heading towards a fiddle I didn't play yet, but I know we got a lot of people who might have a choice. Oh, Sylvia has a choice.
Questions?
I see it. I don't know what the wave means. I'm looking at the other screen here.
Here we go. Let's see. Whistling Rufus.
Okay. Somehow that's where I was going.
You can play what you want, obviously.
No, I like that tune. It's a great old tune. Whistling Rufus, the one-man band.
So much, Dan. Thanks everybody for tuning in. It was such a pleasure to do today. I'm so glad it was here. Please visit our website, southwestfolklife.org. We also are running a fund to support some of our traditional artists who've been hurt pretty hard since the virus came. So you can donate to that GoFundMe. All the money goes direct to our artists, not for staffing. You can also learn about our other upcoming series. And you can nominate another traditional artist or culture bearer.
And I will say, you know, if you want to find out more about me, my website is www.clawdan, C-L-A-W, as in claw hammer, clawdan.com. And with the modern technology we have, I at least have the benefit and joy of still being able to teach, which I do by Skype, Facebook, or FaceTime, whichever web camera chat program you do. And I do have some space for some other students if somebody wants to learn more.
Great. And we'll put Dan's info also.
Yeah, and thank you all for both for this opportunity and for coming and being a part. It's been really cool.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
So, thank you.
Safe morning and stay safe, stay healthy,
You too. And thanks again. Bye-bye now.
Yeah.
I think I got the button there. There we go.